So you wanna get right to the core. So you wanna know what it's all for. So you wanna come off knowing more. Well, you better get hip to Podcast by George. So you wanna get straight to the show. So you wanna know what you need to know. You wanna know what we're all here for. Well, you better get hip to Podcast by George. Podcast by George. Podcast by George.
Hello, hi, how are you? Welcome on back into Podcast by George. We get to one of my favorite shows today, one of my favorite guests. It's Ron Placone. And Ron, for folks that don't know it, he's a touring comedian. He is across the country normally. That was all set down.
Yeah, I was going to say, it's been a minute since that's been the case.
God, yeah, we got to check on that. And Ron is on the Jimmy Dore Show all the time, which is where I catch him when I can. And then, of course, he has his own show, Get Your News On with Ron. He's got an album out there called Agnostic Holiday, and he's got projects in the works. We want to talk about those a little bit. But Ron, right off the top, tell us about the touring schedule, because I was hopeful of seeing you in Chicago maybe, or if you ever come to Des Moines, seeing you there. The masks are coming off. Things are opening up. Are you going to be able to get back out on the road?
Our goal is fall. I mean, we're hoping that come fall we can, and when I say we, I'm referring to myself and Graham Elwood. We have an entire year's worth of tour dates to reschedule. We had to cancel an entire 2020 tour. So our first priority is honoring those dates, or at least as many of them as we can. I mean, we are dealing with a situation where like venues have closed and stuff like that. So, but we're hoping that in the fall, we're able to hit the United States pretty hard and make up for those lost dates and, you know, do the best we can to go to as many places as we possibly can. So, you know, we're working on it right now. We should have some announcements within the next couple of weeks or so. And, you know, fingers crossed that, you know, the country keeps moving in a better direction. I feel like we're definitely making some progress with the vaccine getting out and stuff like that. Hopefully, you know, we keep moving forward and live performances back in the fall.
Okay, we look forward to it and catch you on the internet in the meantime. And in a lot of respects, I think of you as an internet pioneer because, to my knowledge, you were like the first internet news show where the news questions programming came from your viewers. You also have the Zoom show, again, for your patrons. And I got to tell people this, if the beginning of the show, if you heard it, that's Ron doing the theme song for Podcast by George. And what's unique about that isn't that I'm so famous I get my own theme song. It's that anyone can get their own theme song if they're a patron of Ron Placone. Talk about that just briefly, because I know a lot of folks that could and should have their own theme song, Ron.
Yeah, it's a fun little perk. I mean, I started doing it. I forget how it started, but yeah, I mean, I have my theme song for my own show, Get Your News On with Ron, and it's just a goofy little jingle. And some people love it. Some people absolutely hate it. I'm surprised people have a strong response one way or another, to tell you the truth, but they do. And so just kind of for fun, I offered, hey, if you want like a me style theme song, I'll make you one. And people really like that idea, which it's been so much fun for me because I've learned more about the patrons and about the people who like the show, which has been awesome. And I've made theme songs for people who have their own podcasts. I've made theme songs for couples. I've made theme songs for, you know, just people who like to party and just wanted a theme song. I've made theme songs for authors, people who, I think, musicians. It's been a blast. Like, it's so much fun. And for people's pets. Yeah. Just a little bit of everything, and it's been so much fun. And yeah, patreon.com/Ron Placone, and my Patreon is a give what you can level. So whatever, you know, you're comfortable giving, everyone gets all the same things. So yeah, it's fun. I like it.
I do it. I mean, you only get one chance to have your own theme song, folks.
Right?
Go sign up. Honestly, God. Well, you know, the thing I like about your news program is that you cover the heavy stuff, obviously, but you also have on some lighthearted, interesting things that, you know, that I like. You cover some music, for instance, and some sports and stuff like that. But let's talk off the top here about the heavy stuff, and let's talk about the situation in Gaza right now. And I kind of wanted your take take on this, Ron. I think you know probably where I come down on it. I have a fundamental Midwestern understanding of this. Number one, it's not as big a deal here in the Midwest as it probably should be. I mean, a lot of people here don't deal with it in their daily lives. They don't read it in the news. They don't follow it the way that they should. And then secondly, I look at it and well, wait a minute. These are Palestinians that were promised this land by treaty with Israel. Israel's been steadily encroaching on them, imprisoning them, treating them very poorly. The Palestinians don't like it. And Israel has all the guns and weaponry that anybody could ever want, including nuclear weapons and support from the United States. I don't see what the confusion is here. I don't see what's so hard to understand this in some ways.
Yeah, I mean, it's just absolute oppression and brutality. I mean, there's really no other way to frame it. I mean, Israel has all the power in this case.
Yeah.
And I think like what you're saying is, as far as, a lot of people, it's not as big of a thing. I think a lot of people in the United States aren't aware of what's really going on.
Yes.
I'm sure like most people, they probably don't realize that our government gives Israel $10 million a day to brutalize Palestinian people. And by the way, Israel also uses that money to give their people health care. They have a better quality of life there, and we give them $3.8 billion that we're not using here in our own country, first of all. Second of all, yeah, I mean, they blew up an AP building.
I saw that.
Did.
Yeah.
I mean, and when you look at what's really going on, I mean, it's just authoritarian, brutal behavior from a right-wing neo-fascist government in Israel. And here in the United States, we support that government, we being the powers that be in the United States, not the American people. And so there's been a long time effort of the corporate media to associate criticizing the right-wing Israeli government with anti-Semitism, which is absolutely ridiculous. I mean, first of all, there's tons of Jewish people in Israel who are opposed to what their government is doing, just like there's tons of people in the United States who are opposed to what their government is doing. So there's no connection there. And so they've really kind of prohibited the conversation that way, but people are starting to, I think, wake up to it. I mean, there were over 25,000 people in Los Angeles who were out there protesting for Palestine yesterday. There were people in Chicago and I mean all across the country who are seeing this as the seeing this as the oppression and brutality that it is. So I hope that leads to a better tomorrow. And by the way, countries all around the world are calling for an immediate ceasefire. They're not afraid to kind of call this for what it is. The United States is not one of those countries. So, as a country, and again, I'm not referring to the American people, I'm referring to the powers that be, the establishment. We're on the wrong side of this yet again. I mean, we're on the wrong side of most things when it has to do with our own military interests, and Israel has to do with our military interests.
Yeah, and our military allies that Ron's talking about, the people that are opposed to this, that are on the record at the UN with the United States standing alone by itself. And I've got a list here. Matthew Hoa provided this of those out. People can look at that. The other thing that you mentioned that's very striking is the fact we can't get health care for our own people here. We're giving that money to Israel, $10 million a day, folks. They're using it to provide health care, among other things, to their own people. The other thing that's very interesting is a UBI, basically. The money that we're giving Israel on their population amounts to $500 for each Israeli. And as you recall, we couldn't give $2,000 in a check for COVID relief. Some people didn't want to give $1,400, and the Israelis are getting $500 direct from the United States government. I mean, I think that's amazing.
It really isn't. It's one of those things you take a step out, like outside of it all, and you just kind of think, if somebody tried to sell you the United States, you wouldn't buy it in a million years. Like you wouldn't like, do you want to live in this country where we just have an economy of war and we don't spend any money domestically, but we spend it terrorizing most of the world, and you have a really declining quality of life, even though we're the richest country on the face of the earth? Like, no, who would want that? How can anyone even get away with that? And well, here's the United States. So it's quite remarkable. I mean, when you take a step outside and you kind of really look at it. And it's funny, people like me, sometimes people call people like me cynical because we kind of address the system for what it is and call out the corruption and hypocrisy of it all. And in my opinion, I'm like, what is more cynical than the idea that we can't do better than this? How is that not? Like, to me, it's like when people just kind of shrug and go, well, the lesser evil. Like, to me, that is infinitely more cynical than anything I have ever or hopefully will ever say. Like, how is that not like, oh, well, you just got to pick the imperialist who talks nicer. That's the best you can ever hope for. That's it. We need to set the Middle East on fire at the behest of a handful of CEOs. We can't possibly do any better than this. We can't possibly do anything about the climate collapsing. We can't possibly do anything about endless war. We're the richest country in the world, but you can't have other programs other countries take for granted. We can't possibly do anything about this. Just pick the, quote, lesser evil, and let's continue this neoliberalism to neo-fascism ping pong game that we call a society. To me, that is infinitely more cynical than anything I could ever say. But I don't know.
Well, here's what you just said, and this segues very nicely. And that's an old disc jockey term, an old music term. We used to, when one record would go into the next one, we called that a segue. But, Ron's on all these social platforms that I mentioned, and, of course, he's all over Twitter. I'm going to bring this up here if I have any success at all, see if I can find...
I'm rooting for you, George.
Yeah, let's see if this comes up here. The first thing is, this is this list Ron was talking about. This is Matthew Ho talking about these list of people and the UN Security Council members calling for the Israel-Palestine ceasefire. They're the supporters of it, including those heinous people in Russia, for God's sake. There's the United States standing alone. So that was what I mentioned about Matthew Ho. Here's Ron's tweet that I wanted to bring up, and this dovetails very nicely with what he was talking about, and it has a lot to do with where we're at today. And he says, whenever they say you need to respect the office of the presidency, please remember. Now, this goes out to our Democratic neoliberal friends in particular, because, Biden's in office. So Ron says, no, you freaking don't need to do this. You don't need to respect an office where being a warmongering imperialist is a prerequisite. It's quite the opposite. And you've got the neocons, you've got the QAnon people on the right that are adoring Donald Trump like he's some kind of a deity, for God's sake. This applies to them as well.
Oh, absolutely.
And then you've got the Democrats that are, quote unquote, in danger of going to brunch, and this Israel situation is a good example now, and not wanting to do anything that might be viewed as critical or say anything critical of Joe Biden because it could affect the swing of power with the two parties here in the United States. Ron.
Right. I mean, and that tweet, even though I don't say anything in the tweet, that tweet was inspired by what's going on as of recent. Joe Biden's statements are, on the Israel-Palestine issue are absolutely atrocious, as to be expected. I expect nothing different from him. And I would expect nothing different from Donald Trump either. Yeah, there's this whole idea, like a lot of times they kind of bring it back to like, well, you got to respect the position. It's like, no, you don't actually. I don't respect the office of the presidency because, again, being a warmonger is a prerequisite. Why would you respect an office like that? If you saw that in a job description, would you be like, I better have reverence for this? You wouldn't. You have to lie on a daily basis. You have to be fine with endless war. I don't respect that. I don't respect our system at all. I really don't. And it's okay to feel that way because we have a complete banana republic corporate coup for a government. And calling it such does not make you a radical. It just makes you observant about what's going on. And you don't need to respect that. A question that I get a lot is, would you ever run for office? And I always say no, because I think to run for office, at least on the state or federal level, I think that local, it's a little different. But I think like when people ask me that question, they're thinking Congress or higher. And I always say no, because I think you have to have a certain reverence for our system that I just don't have. Like I don't have it. I wouldn't be able to, respect Joe Manchin as a colleague. I wouldn't be able to do anything like that. I wouldn't be able. I mean, the entire time I would just be sitting there going, "This is nuts. How are we doing? Why are we doing this? None of us should have these jobs. None of us. We should just end all of this, have a people's legislature, and pick the president via a draft. That would honestly be better than the garbage we have now."
And the garbage we have now is a direct result of what our friend, not my friend, he might be your friend, but I mean, I really like the guy, Chris Hedges. And he's the one that said, the Democrats became Republicans and the Republicans went further right and went crazy. And that's the reason that we have what we have today. Right. And I know, Ron, you're a big supporter of something that I am too, and it's the People's Party. And I want you to reel me in on this because maybe my perspective isn't exactly correct on the People's Party. But the way that I look at it is the Democrats wanted to have this left wing within the Democratic Party, the Justice Democrats. They wanted to have the squad that would try to propose legislation and dig their heels in and make the Democratic Party move left, like the Freedom Caucus and like the Trumpians are doing with the Republican Party. But they've refused to do that. So now I'm looking at it and thinking it ain't going to happen within the party. What we need is something like the People's Party that can just take 10 or 15% of the Democratic Party left into a separate party. And because they are so crazed with remaining in control, the Democrats will move to the left to assimilate these policies, very similar to what the Republican Party did with the Freedom Caucus, and will finally get some progressive proposals enacted via the Democratic Party if they happen to remain in control, if the People's Party can't overthrow them, so to speak. Does that make any sense to you at all?
No, it absolutely does. And I think it's just a matter of recognizing that this duopoly just needs to break, which is, by the way, not an easy task.
Yeah.
But you know what else is an easy task? Overtaking and reforming a party that has no interest in either of those two things happening. The Democrats spent $50 million against all grassroots challengers.
Yeah.
That was what they wanted. They wanted to stamp out any progressives that were trying to infiltrate that party. And if 50 million's not enough, you know what they're going to do? They're going to spend 50 million more.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, they've proven it time and time again that they have no interest in being, quote, reform because we have Wall Street owns both parties. So at the end of the day, you're still playing the fiddle for Wall Street, whether you're just totally upfront about it the way Republicans are, or whether you're a little more subtle about it like the Democrats are. That's still, at the end of the day, is what you're doing. So you kind of look around and you realize, okay, breaking the duopoly is the only option. And that will either force, the Democrats to be a slightly better party because there is somebody to their left with actual power, or it's just going to stamp them out of existence, honestly, because they just won't. They stand for nothing. And it'll be like, well, when is nothing acceptable? Well, nothing or gruesome. Those are your choices. And both these parties rely on each other. The Democrats are only able to be as ineffective as they are because of how gruesome the Republicans are. Vice versa. The Republicans are only able to be as gruesome as they are because of how ineffective the Democrats are. And one thing those two parties have in common, one of many things, is that they like that system. That system keeps the gravy train rolling for both of them. The Democrats' first priority is not winning. The Democrats' first priority is upholding the status quo. If they can do that and beat a Republican or two, great. If they don't, oh, well, the gravy train keeps rolling. Whereas the Republicans, they're concerned with upholding the status quo too, and they don't need to make any qualms about it. They're basically just, and both parties, when you really break it down, like they're built on hate. Like they're both just built on what they hate. The Republicans are basically just upfront about, hey, if you're poor, we hate you and you're worthless to us. We just want your labor and we want it for as cheap as possible. And you can go die. We don't care. CEOs and billionaires, that's who we look out for. The Democrats are basically like, we're a slightly nicer talking version than that. And also, we really hate people to our left. We hate them more than we hate the Republicans because We hate the Republicans because we feel like we have a little bit of moral superiority to them, but we really hate people to our left because people to our left unmask us for what we really are. So we hate them the most. So you have these two utterly corrupt, beyond redemption parties that are just based on everything they hate, and you're supposed to choose? That's
Yeah.
disgusting. Like what the hell? Like, how can you and I get it. Like, I'm not calling for utopia. I'm not calling for like a perfect politics. I know such a thing doesn't exist. But holy shit, dude.
Yeah.
I mean, what? And so the idea of the People's Party, I went to the Convergence Conference in 2017 and I saw all these different organizations, everything from the Greens to the DSA to Extinction Rebellion to Sunrise to labor activists to scientists to just content creators and everything in between, all kind of getting together. And, I kind of looked at that and I'm like, if we could somehow harness this into one channeled energy, we could really be a force to be reckoned with. And that's what the People's Party is trying to do. Are they going to be successful at it? Well, I don't know. I don't know if they will be or not. That's impossible to know. But I think it's worth a shot. And this is coming from somebody who really keeps electoralism at a far distance. I want little to do with it, if anything. And I do recognize it as one of many things in the toolkit of change. Other things include general strikes and protests, and direct action and community engagement. And I think all those things are even more important than electoralism, honestly. So, it is just one tool in the toolkit, but I think that breaking the duopoly is just an inevitability at this point. It's got to happen.
And I just hope that they can just chip away at it, just get enough to get on some debate stages, just get enough so they get enough support that the Democratic Party, because of this razor's edge electorally in the Electoral College particularly, not so much the popular vote, but they know, the Democrats do, that they can lose in the Electoral College, as they did to Trump, that they have to take on some of those policies espoused by the People's Party and bring those people in if they're going to beat those hated Republicans. And to me, it all goes back to our friend Matt Taibbi, who Ron knows, he was on my podcast too, but he likens it very much to professional wrestling. Those donors that Ron was talking about, they support both parties. I mean, this is pretty much a show on a lot of levels just to keep people engaged and enraged and donating, and we just need somebody to break that up. And by God, I looked at my watch. We're out of time. I want to get to this one thing, this is going to be the fun part of the show, because Ron and I are both big fans of a band, The Hold Steady, and they've got a new album out, and I hadn't caught up to it yet. And Ron encouraged me to check out Open Door Policy, and my God, it is great. And Craig Finn is the singer-songwriter behind that band, and his lyrics, folks, if you haven't checked out The Hold Steady, I mean, he's writing stuff that is like a cross between Lou Reed, Bruce Springsteen, and Bob Dylan. I mean, really, it's that good. Check out Open Door Policy. But Ron, I got to tell you something. I was listening to this album. Now, I've only been through it about 3 times. It's like this guy is reading your mail. I'm listening to it. I don't know what it's just coincidence, I suppose. But he's singing about Pennsylvania, which is where you're from. He's singing about the ocean, which is where you just moved to.
Yeah, right. I mean, well, it's so funny.
Have you got a connection with him? Yeah.
Yeah, right. I mean, it's well, and I talked about this on that. I sent you that lyrics podcast I did. I don't know if you got to check it out.
Yes.
But yeah, like one of the songs on that album, which it is a beautiful album. I've been enjoying it a lot too. But is a song called Lanyards. And it's literally just about a guy who takes a road trip out to California. And it was written before the pandemic because people asked them about that. Because a lot of these songs, they seem like they're around the pandemic, but they're not. Like the whole study's like, look, we wrote this album before the pandemic. But so it's literally just about a guy who takes a road trip to California. But the imagery in there, he's singing about kind of a closed down California where he's like, I went to the docks and I never saw anyone surfing. I saw a couple stars, but I never made it into a movie. Like people are disinterested kissing. And there's so many lines in that song that really I just connected with because I'm one of those people in California during this whole thing. And there is this kind of sense, like everywhere else in the country, that it's just kind of closed down. But you know, I was, despite all that, swimming in the Pacific like a westernmost American. You know, like I literally, I mean, I look out my window and I see the Pacific Ocean.
Yeah.
So I am that westernmost American, at least right now, that he's singing about. And so yeah, it is kind of funny how sometimes like songs can really, they just hit you so hard. And you know, there's just so many. And even like the line, like, back in my hometown there was nothing but the home of the locusts, and the rest of my life to get used to being washed out of showbiz. Like, that's such a powerful, you know, especially being here. There are people I know who made that decision. They decided, I'm going to leave LA. I don't know what the industry is going to be like at the end of all this. And they just went back to their hometown with no plans of coming back here. And it's just like kind of the end of an era to them. And maybe they're going to be right. I don't know. I mean, I don't know what this is all going to look like once the world's really reopened again. I hope that LA continues to be a production hub. I think it will be. But I don't know for sure. And that uncertainty is, you know, kind of overwhelming and kind of scary. And also, you know, the other side of it too, the yin and the yang, is it's also kind of potentially like an opportunity, you know, where you're just kind of looking around. And you know, I mean, I kind of think, I'm like, gee, maybe in this digital world of ours, I'll be at a point where I can live wherever I want and it won't make a difference. And, you know, who knows what I'll do? Maybe I'll stay here. Maybe I'll go, you know, somewhere completely different. So, you know, I try to just roll with it and maintain a healthy amount of optimism. But yeah, but it's a great album. And, you know, when I think about music that has helped me through this, it's one of the most significant albums. And yeah, I've had that kind of relationship with that band and with Craig Finn too, because I think about, you know, when I went through a really bad breakup, his divorce record, which is an album called Clear Heart, Full Eyes, that really got me through it. I listen to that album like every day. And these days, like Open Door Policy, I listen to pretty much every day. So.
Well, that's great, and we are out of time, and it does segue a little bit. Let's go. Take us out here by talking about some of your West Coast projects, and maybe give us the web addresses for your sites and how people can contact you, and we'll just put a bow on it that way.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm trying to get into some scripted stuff next. I mean, I'm trying. I don't have any like concrete announcements quite yet, but I'm working on a movie, and then I have a couple other pilot projects in the works that I'm hoping some production companies step in. The movie I'm gonna do myself no matter what. So I got an indie film coming up. I don't have any formal announcements quite yet, but hopefully I'm gonna have a trailer to show in a month or so. So yeah, that's kind of what's on the horizon for me, and then hopefully tour dates at some point. And you can follow me on Twitter or all the socials. I'm just at Ron Placone on everything. And then ronplacone.com is my website.
That's great. Ron Placone, you are the best, and I am a huge fan, pal. Thanks for coming on this edition of Podcast by George.
Thanks, George. Always a pleasure, man.
And that's going to wrap it up. I hope you enjoy Ron Placone, and check him out on those sites that he mentioned, and look for his upcoming projects. And go to podcastbygeorge.com. Pick a platform where you'd like to follow us, and you'll get notified of each new episode as it releases. But that's going to do it for now. That's going to wrap it up. That's all there is, and there ain't no more. That's another podcast by George.